Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Bob Continetti, Senior Associate Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, and I will be your moderator for today's Faculty and Research Town Hall. We began these online town halls to support the response of the university to the COVID-19 pandemic, and they continue to be a useful way to communicate across campus about a variety of opportunities and challenges we face related to public health and many other topics. Some questions were submitted during registration, but please feel free to use the Q&A window during this town hall to submit additional questions for our panelists at any point during the session. Due to time limitations, we may not be able to get to all of your questions live, but we will log all questions and follow up after the event. Please continue to reference campus websites, including the Return to Learn website and future campus notices for important updates on other topics. The link to that website is now being provided in the chat. Today's town hall has live closed captioning available in two ways. First, you can click on the closed caption button at the bottom of the screen and select Show Subtitles, or you can also click on the link that's being pasted into the chat as I speak. So now, with no further ado, I would like to introduce our first co-host for today's town hall, Executive Vice Chancellor Elizabeth Simmons, for some welcoming remarks. Elizabeth, EVC Simmons.
Thanks very much, SAVC Continetti. It's a real pleasure to be here with everybody to start off the new year and with, as always, new opportunities and new challenges. In particular, I am so delighted that we have our new collective bargaining agreements in place so that we can move forward together. I'm very appreciative of how instructors tried to address the needs of the most academically vulnerable students in getting grades in a timely way also, and very appreciative that over 97% of fall grades have now been submitted. Thank you very much for that on behalf of our students. I know that the last few months have been a really, really tough time for everybody, and there have been tensions and disagreements. And we have a lot of healing to do on campus. Conversations are just starting about how one might try to promote this kind of healing. And I would love to hear your ideas, perhaps today through the Q&A and the chat, or otherwise feel free to send me ideas. In fact, it is, of course, time to move forward together to think about how to meet all of the competing priorities in the university. But this is work we're familiar with, right? We always have more great ideas and high priorities than there are space and time and funds to do absolutely everything. So we know how to do this. We'll work through it together. In particular, the contracts raise many different kinds of financial issues that I know we'll be addressing today and into the future. And I wanted to give just a tiny bit of context on this. If you think back to summer 2020, we were facing a 4% budget cut because of the onset of the pandemic. And the Academic Affairs Budget Guidance Committee, which had much important participation by Senate leadership and faculty, and that committee noted that there were significant discretionary resources like carry forward and such that were in accounts controlled by faculty, departments, schools. And the committee recommended leaving those resources in place at that time and not using them towards the 4% budget cut, but instead recommended that the discretionary resources at the EVC's level be applied toward those budget cuts, and that faculty, departments, schools take more responsibility for future needs that might arise since the EVC's carry forward would be depleted. And that recommendation was accepted, and I acted upon that. And so now as we face new needs, we're all going to have to work together at every single level of the university to address those needs. And in fact, we already have a standard method of handling resource requests. These move up the chain of authority, as you might say, from perhaps a PI to certainly a department, to a dean, to vice chancellor, to chancellor. And if the leader at a given level finds that the request is really meritorious, is very high priority, but they don't have quite enough funds to fully cover the cost, they are expected to raise the request with the next higher level of authority. So, but at the same time, of course, a unit is responsible to work within its budget. And I just wanted to close in noting, we don't yet know the exact full cost of the contract. We don't yet know the fall budget of the university. So the safest bet in thinking about admissions of our next cohort of graduate students for fall 23 is to be really conservative, to assume that the dollar amount of your department's fall 23 budget will be the same as for fall 22. That's very conservative. And plan the cohort size of the incoming class according to staying within that budget. If we're conservative for this fall, we'll set ourselves up really well for the future as we work together on the future. I'm very glad there's so many of you here this afternoon to discuss all the important issues of the day. We do best as an institution when we do work together and collaborate. So thank you for being here. Back over to you, Bob.
Thank you, EVC Simmons. Next, we will have welcoming remarks from our second co-host, Vice Chancellor for Research, Corinne Peek-Asa. Vice Chancellor.
Thank you, Bob. I just want to welcome everyone to our conversation today, and really sort of echo the sentiment that EVC Simmons set for us, and that we are here together. We're in this together, and we will arise from this together. It is a difficult time. This is a disruption. It's a perturbation. One thing that has become even more clear to me through the last several months is that we are very passionate about our university. We are very passionate about our students. We're passionate about our training. We're passionate about our research, and we're passionate about each other. So although we absolutely have some difficult solutions to figure out, we have some challenges in how we will do that together. But I also want to have a sentiment of optimism in how we move forward. And I want to challenge us. I think we probably have experts on this call that understand, that study things like disruption theory, change theory, workplace change. And we have an opportunity to not try to go back to normal because we know we can't. It's a different time. It's a different set of circumstances, but we can create a new future. There are challenges to the value proposition of higher education. And when we're investing in our students, we have the opportunity to improve that value proposition. So I won't take a lot of time, but I know we have some difficult things to work out, but also want to add some optimism that we do know what we're doing. There are many conversations going on. We want those to be engaged. It might not always be smooth, but we will absolutely move forward in a positive way. Back to you, Bob.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor Peek-Asa. Next, we will hear from Dean of the Division of Graduate Education and Postdoctoral Affairs, Jim Antony. Dean Antony.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. Much appreciated. I wanted to let you know two things. As you might recall, recently we sent out a pretty broad message asking for input on the kinds of questions that you might have. Thank you to the literally hundreds of people who submitted questions. My team has been working diligently, including over the holiday weekend, to begin organizing those into an initial FAQ. We hope in the coming days, as soon as possible, to release what we're able to on that FAQ, just to help you start to understand how to respond to some of the questions you might be getting. In addition, there will be a campus announcement coming out very soon about a GEPA facilitated town hall, which will focus entirely on the implementation of the contracts for our TAs, for our graduate student researchers, and for our postdoc scholars. So stay tuned for those announcements. Thanks, Bob. Back to you.
Thank you, Dean Antony. I would now like to introduce our first presenter who will give us some enrollment updates, and that's Associate Vice Chancellor for Enrollment Management, Jim Rollins. Jim?
Thanks very much, and hello, everybody. Today, we'll give some updates around several things in enrollment management, especially regarding our planning about enrollment of undergraduates for the coming year, as well as a few things about how you can help us with that and some things related to aid and support for those students. So next slide, please. One of the first things I want to share, if you haven't seen this yet, it's probably because the UC Office of the President is very careful and deliberative about sharing this information, but the fall 22 enrollment data here, if it's news to you, it's good to catch up about it. You can see that over the last few years, just 20, 21, and 22, our first-year applications to UC San Diego have been going up quite a bit, 30% in just 2 years' time. And that has come without us necessarily having any additional room for those students. So it's made for a very selective environment. Some of you are really excited to see that. Others, like me, get very concerned with how that can have to do with impacts to access for this great education we offer here. But without going into too much depth because of other things to share today, you can see a lot packed into this one slide here. Again, in an increase of applications, you can see that from fall 21 to 22, the size of this year's incoming class of first-year students went down by roughly 1,000 in a single year. And along with that, the transfer numbers went down as well. Those two things give us some much needed relief on the front of our total undergraduate enrollment. And we'll start to connect this for you in the next few slides to where we're headed beyond this. But those are some big things going on right now. An increase in first years and a decrease in transfers. Next slide, please. As it relates to what we're doing looking ahead, the fall 22 outcomes, several of you on Zoom might already know that we have within that smaller class some things we've done very carefully with the work of the admissions office and others to really balance out some of the things in departments that were far oversubscribed in the last year in particular, while also really attending to some of those access goals. We've got within this year's smaller class some really great gains on things like ethnic and racial diversity, along with some things like first gen and low income status, balancing out where we're headed. What we're doing out of enrollment management that especially department leaders and school level deans and others will like to hear is that we're really trying to change the paradigm of how often and how deeply we communicate with all of you about this planning, so that instead of seeing the incoming class show up, you get a lot more of an idea what's coming. While a lot of the data we're sharing is embargoed, we're trying more and more to engage more of the campus in seeing what's coming. And we want every department on this campus to be gathering information that we've shared over email in the last week or two surrounding fall 23 applicant data. And we're even inviting each department to ask for an individual appointment with us if they would like. We need every department to respond to the survey link we've put out. Ideally by today was the deadline. And this really surrounds the stuff in the white box on the right side of this slide. We really have this coming year an even number of applications for both first years and transfers. We actually consider that a relief for a lot of reasons, that we aren't continuing to grow in applications. We're also able to tell you that while we continue to negotiate and discuss this at the system level, our general inclination is to think that we'll only go up by about 1 to 2% in new undergraduate enrollment next fall. Within that, there is a lot going on, though. We have 36 different majors for whom the applications of first-year students increased by over 15% for this year. We have another 18 majors that decreased by at least that much. So a lot of whether departments should expect one thing or another against this kind of flat landscape really depends on those details. We're having open Zoom meetings, by the way, this Friday the 20th, January the 30th, and February 2nd. Those are listed there. And we really encourage all departments and schools to participate in those and ask our questions. If you're a participant in this town hall that's not in such a role, if you're not a department chair or a dean or an associate dean, I encourage you to check in with those leaders in your area to learn more from them about what they're discussing with us. Next slide, please. In general, what we're really trying to make sure we do again in this era of transparency that we're starting here is to help everyone understand that there continues to be change, even in a time where we're getting things more stable. Also to help everyone understand that application numbers don't completely define what's going to happen the rest of the cycle, and that mainly we're going to communicate much more often with the relevant areas so that you're not surprised by any of this. Next slide, please. Some of the main things we're doing just to wrap up this process is that we're sharing information throughout the year, trying to give you information at the time you need it. Again, if you're a department chair or a dean, so that, for example, in December, we shared initial information about applications. In February, we'll provide an update to that once students who have applied get a chance to finish changing their mind about their majors, which we let them do for a little bit. And then once we decide who to admit, we'll forecast for everybody what it's starting to look like for how the size of the incoming class is going to shape up with more and more detail as we go throughout the spring and into the summer. Again, all along the way, we want you to be more informed. And next slide, please. If you're wondering what could you be doing to help with this, one of the simplest things you can do is to help when we put on Triton Days. Those dates will be in April and May like they usually are. and especially related to the first year students who we're offering by mid to late March. We'll be doing our in-person program on Saturday, April the 8th, with a few virtual programming dates leading up to that. We'll do the same thing for transfers in early May, also with virtual dates. These are big welcoming events, and any of you who have participated in them in the past know that they can be a really great moment for these admitted students to decide whether they're coming here or elsewhere. You can see in the call out box on this slide that we had over 13,000 registered participants last year. And among those students, this yield rate, we'd call it, the acceptance rate from the students of just over half of the first years and about 3/4 of the transfers really shows that these yield rates, which are higher than our overall for the students we offer admission, these programs on campus and the virtual versions definitely make a difference. And so we really want your engagement in that. Honestly, we also need to make sure things aren't happening independently at the same time so that we present a unified front of coordination for the families. And if you haven't registered yet, we really encourage your program or department or other office to register for its involvement at the link below here. And I believe we're going to put that in the chat as well. So last slide, one other thing I'm going to share before handing it back over is that in the financial aid area this year, we're very excited to be getting going with a new program related to work study and financial aid. The LAEP program is very much designed to focus on especially students who've been underserved in these areas in the past, a chance to do research-based work that helps as a path towards their careers. We've got several priorities here listed in these 4 bullets in terms of how we're going to get this program going with a spring pilot. And this pilot program for LAEP is put on jointly by the Career Center, Financial Aid and Scholarships, which is part of enrollment management, and undergraduate research. Any of your areas who are interested in providing new opportunities for students around the funding and the broadcasting of information with LAEP, stay tuned for information that's going to be coming out for one or more of our offices in the coming weeks. This is but one of many examples we could give you of areas in which we want more and more to see the students that we know are strong enough that we admit to come here, having great resources to finish debt-free as they finish at UC San Diego, and this is going to be another neat step towards that. Thanks very much, and Senior ABC Continetti, back over to you.
Thank you for those updates, ABC Rollins, especially about that new LAEP program. That sounds very exciting. Next, we're going to hear from Executive Director of Triton Auxiliary Programs and Services, Josh Kavanaugh, about transit and parking updates.
Thank you so much, Bob, and thank you for having me today. So for those of you who were on campus during the first week of winter quarter, it was a little wet out there, and as usual, during those first weeks when attendance is very, very high on campus, we saw increased parking violations and increased congestion in our facilities. Thank you for your patience on that. Our parking enforcement team is on it with a explicit focus on the most congested A spaces, including in the Scholars, South, and Gilman parking structures. So help is on the way. In the meantime, you can take matters into your own hands in terms of avoiding some of those congested areas. During the first 2 weeks of every quarter, we publish near real-time parking availability information on our website. And then at the end of week 1 and end of week 2, we publish a simplified guide, something you could print out as a PDF and keep in your vehicle, that shows when the various lots and garages on campus fill by permit type. So you can see an example of that on the screen there. There are A lots on both East and Central campus that don't fill all day long. And by choosing one of those facilities first, you can help save yourself a little bit of stress. Speaking of saving stress, if you have the option to avoid North Torrey Pines Drive or Genesee late next week, it will once again be the Farmers Insurance Open. The Open was very different during the COVID period. They're back to full scale now, and the Open starts a day earlier than it used to historically. So this will mean reduced parking availability at the glider port and also more congestion in the Torrey Pines Center South Garage, in addition to that traffic activity on North Torrey Pines Drive in Genesee. Next slide, please. So of course, you can avoid the traffic and the parking challenges entirely if you get on the bus, and so many of your colleagues are doing that right now. So with the VC50 for Transit program, your first 3 months as a transit rider are absolutely free. After that, you get unlimited rides on the bus or trolley for just $27 a month pre-tax. And you can sign up for that at transportation.ucsd.edu. More than 1,800 of your colleagues are now riding transit at a reduced rate every day with support from their vice chancellors. In addition, we've been rebuilding post-COVID for Triton Transit, our on-campus transit service, and I'm delighted to share that the inside loop is back. We now have that clockwise service on the central campus every 15 minutes to complement the outside loop, which is our counterclockwise route. In addition, we're up to all full-size buses now on the SIO shuttle. Those are running every 15 minutes during the weekdays. And our historic weekend service to SIO, which was only seasonal in the past, is now running year-round. So every 30-minute service to SIO all weekend long. And in addition, our mobility or ADA service runs 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. on weekdays or 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. on weekends. If you need assistance with qualifying for that service, disability consulting on the campus is your pathway to doing that, and there's more information at the link on your screen. Finally, I know how committed our faculty are, as many members of the university community are, to decarbonization, and I'm delighted to share that we've received our first electric buses for the campus. We will have at least the first 2 of those deployed this quarter. We're working them through the licensing process right now, and we have 4 more arriving this spring and are working on converting our entire fleet to electric vehicles. Next slide, please. So for those of you like me who made a New Year's resolution to get out and get a little bit more active, the last couple weeks of weather have not been good for us, but there's still time. We can still do it, gang. And to help you get out and walk and bike and feel confident in doing so, we're here to help. A MIPS or multi-directional impact protection system helmet is just $10 with the voucher you can get through Triton Commuter Club. We'll hook you up with a $10 U-lock as well. If you just walk into the Gilman Service Center in the Gilman parking structure, we'll give you a free reflective vest and a free light set for your bike or other micro-mobility device. In addition, when you log your trips with the Triton Commuter Club, you can earn incentives like free half-price parking for those days that you do need to drive to campus. You'll earn entries in our monthly prize drawings, and once a quarter, we give away a free e-bike to somebody who has been taking lower impact modes to campus every day. Additionally, if you'd like to purchase an electric bike, we have an 8% discount with San Diego Fly Rides. That's been an ongoing incentive. And we're excited that we will soon be bringing you an in-store incentive with Rad Power Bikes. News on that coming out to the campus in the next weeks. Next slide, please. So finally, if you didn't get that, glorified in the commercials car with a big red bow on it this holiday season, and not many of us did, there is still time to get a great deal on an electric vehicle. In fact, it's gotten better in 2023. I know this isn't for everyone, but if you are thinking of a new vehicle purchase anytime soon, please know that we've got some great deals on charging for you on the campus. 20% off of your weekday charging with the EV Charging Club here on campus. And when you charge on campus, you charge during the day and maximize your use of renewable energy. In addition, go out, get that EV if you're going to be purchasing a vehicle, and we've got a special window now through March. We saw in the Infrastructure Act a renewal of the EV tax credit and some changes that came to it. Well, they're late on publishing the rules for that. And what that means is that the restrictions on battery material origin do not apply for these first 3 months of 2023. That means a vehicle that come April is only going to get a $3,750 tax credit, gets $7,500 right now. In addition, the California tax rebates have increased, and those are qualified based on income, but they're up to additional $5,500 on top of the federal incentives. And there's a new federal tax credit for used EVs that's out there. If you're a low or moderate income buyer, this means you could be purchasing a Chevy Bolt for as little as $20,000 for a brand new electric vehicle. The Bolts are getting more than 200 miles to a charge right now. It's a wonderful, wonderful value out there. Additionally, Tesla just in the last week has dropped their price by as much as $13,000 for a Tesla. And that means that their higher value vehicles are now qualifying for federal tax credits that they didn't qualify for just a week ago. And back to you, Bob.
Thank you for those exciting transit updates, Executive Director Kavanaugh. Next, I invite Chief Human Resources Officer Terry Winbush to give us an update about the new framework apartments that are helping us deal with the challenges in housing for faculty and staff. Terry?
Thank you, Bob. Hi, everybody. Happy Tuesday after a long weekend. As many of you are aware, some of our faculty and staff experience challenges securing housing, particularly in neighborhoods with access to public transit options that connect to our campus here in La Jolla and the Hillcrest campus. For that reason, UC San Diego is planning transit-oriented rental housing prioritized for UC San Diego and UC San Diego Health faculty and staff. This housing will span a wide range of rental rates based on apartment sizes, amenities, and locations. Rates are set to cover costs because it's very expensive in San Diego, which means that the rent will be at the lower end of the market rates for these types of units with caps on.
Did we lose Terry's audio?
Chris,
Terry, your audio is cutting out. So perhaps it's best if I take over this discussion. You know, what we have here is a slide that shows some aspects of the framework apartments. In the framework apartments, this is in downtown San Diego, within walking distance of the San Diego Blue Line trolley and close to the Park and Market San Diego building downtown. And there's 87 furnished smart apartments there for staff and faculty. And as we see, you know, here we see some pictures of the interior of these spaces. These apartments are small, but they're highly engineered and state-of-the-art design. Full furnished studio apartments. There's a fitness center for residents, a cafe style co-working space with a reading room, a lounge and game room, high-speed cable and internet, secure bike racks, keyless entry, and a rooftop community lounge with outdoor terrace and barbecue, fire pit, flat screen TV. Parking is available nearby from 5 different parking garages. So, you know, this is a really state-of-the-art facility. And in fact, there's a brief video that we're going to play that we can go ahead and take a look at to put this in more context. Please, let's play the video. All right, so you can see from the video that these are really they're not big apartments, but they're really engineered to make maximal use of the space and really state-of-the-art design. I don't know, Terry, are you back online? I don't think she is. So in any case, I would like to encourage anyone to learn more about the apartments and the neighborhood and to schedule a tour of the property. And maybe we can put that link for that website into the chat. So let's then therefore move on. That was an internet issue with Executive Director Winbush, but I thank her for putting that together for us. Now I'd like to introduce our next group of presenters who are going to return to the question of the COVID-19 pandemic and give us an update on the status of the pandemic and campus health, safety, and student wellness. We've been scheduled to have Professor of Medicine in the Division of Infectious Diseases and Global Public Health, Dr. Chip Schooley, and Director of Medical Services, Dr. Stacy San Miguel. So I'd like to turn this over then to Dr. San Miguel and Dr. Schooley.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Bob. I'll give a brief update about the general state of the pandemic. Dr. San Miguel will talk about what's going on campus, and then I'll return just to make a very brief comment about influenza, which was a topic of our discussion at the last faculty town hall. If you look at the overall status of COVID in the US, you can see that we are in the midst of a relatively low-key wave of a new variant that has been called BQ.1 or BQ.1.1. This variant has been gradually moving from east to west and has us running now nationally at a rate of about 50,000 cases per day. We've been ranging between 35 and 70,000 cases a day since the end of October. Next slide. California is mirroring what's going on in the US. We're in a little bit of a hiatus now without as much of an uptick as the national scene for reasons that I'll show you in just a minute in terms of the trajectory of the variant geographically. Next. This shows you, again, geographically that there is more activity in the east of the US than the west. This caption on the right panel should say 1/10/2023. You can see that things are quieter, green being quieter, yellow and orange being busier in terms of cases. Things are quieter in the west now than they were, and quieter in the west than they are in the east in terms of COVID. Next. Hospitalizations in San Diego County remain at about 400 cases per day. This is a census, not new admissions per day, which is relatively stable over the last month or month and a half. The vast majority of people in the hospital with COVID are people over the age of 65, and many of them have underlying conditions that put them at greater risk for COVID complications. Next slide. When one looks at the ratio of people who are vaccinated to unvaccinated, in terms of both the hospitalization rate and the death rate per capita, you can see that the vaccination continues to reduce both of these severe outcomes by about 50%. So although the variants have been evolving, the vaccines that we're currently using still have significant activity, particularly in preventing more advanced and more severe disease. The prior antibody therapies that we used to use no longer work on the currently circulating variant, but the antiviral drug, Paxlovid, still does. And I would encourage any of you who are in the older age groups, and the older age groups, depending on other conditions, can range to as low as 50 or 65 and over, should consult with your physician if you have symptoms of COVID and a positive test, because this also significantly decreases the likelihood of hospitalization. Next. Where are we going? One of the problems with case counts these days is we're not doing as much nucleic acid testing, and not all antigen tests, which we're doing more and more of these days, are being reported to the health authorities. But one of the best ways to get an idea about COVID activity in the community continues to be the wastewater RNA concentration. You can see in blue that over the last month, we've been seeing a gradual increase in the amount of RNA in our wastewater here in San Diego County. That is now up to about 8 million copies from as low as about 1 million copies at the hiatus around Halloween. Next. What we're seeing in the water is mainly is increasingly this new variant, these XBB variants that now make up almost half of the variants in the water, or make up almost half of the variants in the US as a whole. You can see that if you look at those expanding purple areas on the histograms moving from left to right, you can see more and more of this XBB 1.5 over time, with most of it beginning since the beginning of December. Next. But what you can also see here, if we go to a breakdown by geographic region, the purple here is accounts for about 80% of the virus in the Northeast, but still only about 16% of the virus in the Southwest. So this variant is moving from east to west, and we still haven't yet seen the full brunt of what we're likely to see as the virus moves in this direction. Most cases, particularly for vaccinated people, have been relatively mild and continue to respond in appropriate people to the use of Paxlovid. Let me turn now to Dr. San Miguel, who will talk a little bit about what's going on the campus and in San Diego. Dr. San Miguel? Oh, I'm sorry, this is just the variance in the Point Loma wastewater. Bottom line here, complicated slide, much less of the XBB variant so far in San Diego. Now to you, Dr. San Miguel.
Thanks, Dr. Shuley. Do you want, well, I'll just go over this one.
Yes, there you go. Yep.
Just to let you know that in terms of the R effective, it remains about stable around 1. It's been like that for the last couple months. Next slide. And then just to show where we are in terms of good things, we are in green for student vaccination rate, as well as where we are for county COVID hospitalizations. We've moved more to yellow in campus case rate, in the residential student case rate, as well as in the campus employee vaccination rate and positivity, and the county case rate as well. And we are in the red for the residential wastewater, but please keep in mind that we are having more students who live on campus isolate in place. And then, of course, as Dr. Shuley showed, we're having more detection of the variants in the wastewater. Next slide. Oh, do you want to go over this?
Well, I guess so. I think we skipped over a couple of yours. Perhaps we'll get to them in a minute. The bottom line here is influenza peak occurred at the end of November, and flu seems to be on the decline. So while not all respiratory illnesses are COVID, there's still a fair amount of flu floating around, but much less each week. Let's see if your slides of the student isolation and so forth come up next, Stacey. Okay, back to you.
Here we are. Okay. So effectively, as Dr. Shuley kind of pointed out, that there was an increase in the county case rates, especially after the holidays. It seems to be coming down. In terms of the employees, also those case rates peaked in the holidays and have been coming down. And then for students, the student rate has also come down, but it's much less than the county. Please keep in mind that these numbers are impacted by the volume of testing. So prior to January 2nd, most of the students were testing primarily for symptoms or history of exposure, a few for travel. But after the holidays and the students, when they started moving back, more testing was done and more asymptomatic students were testing. The next slide, please. So as you can tell here, on the left-hand side, the number of tests, students were testing probably under 100 tests per day. And then starting after January 2nd, we were seeing up to 200 tests, and then peaked on January 9th at 1,000 tests per day. So we're seeing hundreds more tests being done by students compared to December. And although we have a higher number of positive cases, overall, it looks like it makes our positive case rate lower. It looks like, though, with the students that the number of positive tests seems to be trending downward, which would be a good sign. Next slide. Just some updates about winter quarter campus isolation. We only have 25 rooms that are designated from campus for isolation. We're reserving these rooms for positive students who have roommates who are immunocompromised or at high risk for getting complications, or if they themselves have high risk or immunocompromised conditions. The public health team continues to manage the isolation of students and staff. And our student health COVID team is managing students with medical questions or if they need treatment like Paxlovid. Both teams were staffing during the campus closure and during the break. So there was always support for the students. If students have a positive rapid antigen test, it's important for us to know about those results, or if they have questions, the easiest way for them to contact student health is to send a My Student Chart message through to the COVID request team. This is much faster than if they tried calling the clinic. So please encourage your students to use My Student Chart. And then also student health, we ask that you do not request the students to get a medical excuse note if they're isolating for COVID. Next slide. In terms of vaccines, so the COVID-19 vaccines with the rec gyms site closing in December, currently we're telling students and staff that they can get the COVID vaccine or boosters through local retail pharmacies, such as CVS, Walgreens, or Rite Aid. If the students have UC ship, we prefer that they get it at CVS because it's covered by the insurance. Student health is working on the IT logistics to be able to offer the COVID-19 vaccine to students at student health. We'll let you know when that happens. In terms of the influenza vaccine, students can make appointments at student health with a nurse clinic appointment to get the influenza vaccine. They can also get the influenza vaccine at any retail pharmacy. And finally, just to let you know that we are providing Mpox vaccine at student health. Students can request this through Ask a Nurse. Next slide. All right, I think that's it for us.
All right, well, thank you, Dr. Schooley and Dr. San Miguel, for those important updates. I'll now hand the podium over to our Vice Chancellor for Research, Corinne Peek-Asa, to introduce some research updates. Vice Chancellor Peek-Asa.
Thank you, Bob. Well, first, I'm delighted to turn the podium over to Michael Corinne, who is our Chief Information Security Officer. And as he will explain, we have a number of layers of evolving issues around cybersecurity and data management coming from federal government, coming from the state. They're very good moves forward to improve the security of our data, while also trying to make sure that the data we use for research is more available, more accessible, and solving bigger problems. So Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Corey. So lovely Thursday afternoon, everyone. There's actually a little sun shining in my window, which is encouraging, especially when I'm going to talk about new regulations. The two that I want to talk about is the NIH data sharing requirements, which I won't spend a whole lot of time on. And then I want to talk on for a bit about this National Security Presidential Memo 33, which I suspect most of you haven't heard about. And what I've given you here is just to pull a few of the bullet points. It's like Corey was saying, we all know the importance of open sharing of scientific data. It goes to the heart of reproducibility and replicability. And the government has really started to focus on research as an important national asset. And thus we're seeing all of these new regulations around cybersecurity coming forward. So go ahead, next slide, please. So NIH issued their final policy. We're all familiar with data management plans as is required by most grant applications. NIH has a new process that goes into effect on the 25th that requires a data management and sharing plan to be included as part of your budget justification. Now, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of details to what's involved here, but suffice it to say, we're very fortunate that we have a terrific library here that supports data curation, the creation of data management plans, and they have a terrific website up with all the information you need on this new requirement. I've given you both a short link and the full link there. On that website, you'll find not only links to a checklist of what needs to be included in your data management and sharing plan, but a tool to develop it. And it's important to remember, this is not a thesis you have to write in association with your proposal. Data management plans need to be 2 pages maximum. So they're not a huge amount of work, but the amount of detail they're asking for now, it has expanded over the past. And if you have any specific questions, research-data-curation@ucsd.edu will get you in touch with the experts at the library who can assist with that. On to the next slide. So I want to talk a little bit more about National Security Presidential Memo 33, which does bring some burden to faculty, and that's why I want to spend a little bit of time on it. It requires a number of different things of any institution that receives more than $50 million in federal funding. And obviously, since we're 7th in the country at receiving federal funding, it applies to UC San Diego. It does require specific research cybersecurity training for researchers. It requires use of a digitally persistent identifier, and that's basically an ID number, think of it that way, that uniquely identifies a particular faculty member persistently over time. There's some expanded disclosure requirements. They're going to want to know all your foreign contracts and foreign travel. And this is one that we're going to have to work on quite a bit, has to be reported and in many cases approved in advance. And then finally, there are some very specific security practices that are required. So go on to the next slide and I'll show you how we're planning to attack these here. The mandatory training, I know many of you are probably going, oh my God, I'm more training. I just did my security training. What we want to do is make the required research security training exchangeable with the existing mandatory cybersecurity training. The existing cybersecurity training has gotten better over the years. It's not bad. It's licensed by Office of the President for use on each location. But we will be developing some custom security training that focuses on what researchers need to know, and satisfying that training will be exchangeable for the other, so you won't have to do both. Many of you already have ORC IDs. This is, you can go to orca.org without an H, it's not a flower in this case. And we will designate that as our digitally persistent identifier. Roughly speaking, we're thinking about 50 to 60% of the faculty already have an ORC ID. So this won't be a big lift. And I will say that ORC ID is widely used in higher ed. It looks like almost everybody is standardizing on it. So we will be licensing an enterprise license of the ORC ID service. And hopefully we can help manage that for people a bit. That ID will propagate into grant proposals, any sort of submission to the federal government, any of the agencies. We're waiting on some final guidance from the agencies. They are expanding the disclosure requirements for, especially, like I said, foreign contracts, foreign work. Now, the good thing about NISPOM 33 is they've required the agencies to normalize this. So it's the same requirements for all agencies, but we're waiting the final guidance on what that's going to look like. And then I mentioned the foreign travel. It's quite possible there may be the requirement to receive approval to travel, or at least to register travel, regardless of where you're going overseas. High-risk areas, what we're required to do is provide you some guidance on how to secure your research data when you travel and any research assets you take with you. Some of you are probably going, what's a high-risk area? That starts off very easily. The federal government identifies these high-risk areas as the sanctioned countries. So many of you have heard of ITAR, the countries where the government has said certain, they call it a munitions list, but they mean certain kinds of information can't be taken overseas. So you can see a list of the sanctions there, and we will have to set up a full system to allow you to do this as seamlessly as possible. Go on to the next slide. I want to talk just for a second about the security practices that are required. You notice what I say here, they're not draconian. They're very basic cyber hygiene. There's 14 of them. 8 of them I feel we can address just through existing campus-wide security measures. So it's not like you're going to have to go look at all 14 of these and make sure you're doing each of them. Some of them we take care of just automatically through the process we do across the campus. However, it does require the institution, not the PI, to certify that we are adhering to these practices. So we're going to build on top of our cybersecurity certification for research program, the certification of PIs and research labs on campus. There's the URL for it, assure.ucsc.edu. And you'll see there's a link in the chat now to a workshop. We've been doing these for, I don't know, 6 or 9 months now, on how to complete your CCR certification. It's a self-assessment. It's very quick and easy unless you have a very complex environment. And we are moving in the process of making this required sometime probably this quarter, maybe as late as this summer. Depends on how we roll this out. And you can also email CCR-support and get someone to come help you with this. But I did want to point out there are certain obligations we can't take care of centrally. And I've got 4 bullet points of them here. Now, none of this should be very surprising. Anti-malware software, the campus provided version, so we can see what is going on and help protect you. Make sure software is updated. Make sure you're using strong credentials. As I said, this is all basic cyber hygiene and shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. But now we're going to have to be certifying it in order to receive federal funding. The last item on here I wanted to mention is databases holding sensitive data. It requires us to ensure that public-facing systems are distinct from the systems that hold confidential or protected data. Now, in many cases, that's already the case, but you'd be surprised how often we find someone is storing a website which is serving up sensitive data to a protected community. They're putting it on the internet, obviously, because they want to make it available. But the NESPOM 33 says we're not allowed to do that. So we're going to be having to reach out to people and talk to researchers when we find it about how to change that. So not a terrible lift, but something we're going to have to get very diligent about watching and working toward this year. And I think that's my last slide. Yep. So back over to you, Corey.
Great. Thank you, Mike. So I get the fun job of giving everyone the most recent data from the National Science Foundation's Higher Education Research and Development Survey. This is called the HERD survey. It is the only survey used to track nationwide research expenditures. So it is its own ranking system, but it's also used as a component in many of the ranking systems for universities as a whole. I want to point out, as we're looking at the data, that it's very old because we submit the data, it gets verified through a couple cycles, and then they lock it in. And so this is from fiscal year 21. We are already working on submitting and getting data for fiscal year 22 and even capturing data for fiscal year 23. But I do think we deserve to pat ourselves on the back that for fiscal year 21, we're ranked number 7 among all research institutions, public and private, and 5th among public universities. Overall, we are 7th in federal expenditures. We're very strong in federal expenditures. And I want to point out that we have some growth in funding from some of the smaller federal agencies, such as the Department of Education, the CDC, the Small Business Administration, USDA, the Agricultural Agency. These funds grew from 33 million to 148 million. I attribute that to our campus as a whole being very innovative, and probably some of our new faculty working in areas that are expanding our research portfolio. So very exciting. We can go on to the next slide. Again, we have consistently been in the top 10. That is astonishing and wonderful for a university that is as young as we are, and we continue to see growth. So I anticipate that we will move up in rankings as we look at data from the next 2 fiscal years. So with that good news, our office works tirelessly to make sure we are supporting the research administrative and compliance infrastructures as best as possible, and identifying new funding sources. So I want to give one quick update with the next slide for the California Climate Initiative, which hopefully everyone has heard about by now. And there are two pieces that I want to bring everyone's attention to. One is that we should hear approval in the next couple of weeks and start March 1st on a $1 million allocation to UC San Diego for innovation and entrepreneurship. This will be work conducted campus-wide, organized by our Office of Innovation and Commercialization. It will include most of the funding going to RFAs for faculty PIs to move their research into our Innovation Accelerator. We have a number of other programs across campus and with our Office of Innovation and Commercialization following this kind of process. So it will be a structure that should be familiar to those of you who are active in innovation, but we'll have a stronger climate focus. It will involve some student opportunities, helping students learn and understand and participate in the innovation process. And the last piece for the innovation component will be partner engagement. So we will be seeking ideas and opportunities to help educate our community, engage our community in some of our climate change ideas. I also want to bring to everyone's attention that the timeline for the larger projects, of which there are two types, has been extended from January 17th to January 19th. So there's still a couple days to get those in. This is a chunk of $80 million to California institutions of higher learning. It's organized by the UC Office of the President, and there are two types of proposals. One are climate action seed grants, and one are larger climate action matching grants. The seed grants are $500,000 to $2 million, and the matching grants $2 million to $10 million. And the most important two pieces of these projects, one is that they align with the California climate priorities and have an ability to show impact on the state within a short time frame. And the second is that they are in partnership with industry communities that we serve and Californians in general. So with that, we'll move from state to federal opportunities, and I will turn it over to Natalie Alpert, our Executive Director of Government Research Relations. Natalie.
Thank you, VC Peek-Asa. So I'll jump right into more good news on federal research funding for FY23. So in late December, Congress passed a $1.7 trillion spending bill to fund the federal government. Non-defense spending was funded at the highest level in history at $800 billion, which represents a 9.3% increase over the previous year. So the good news is nearly all of UC San Diego's federal fiscal priorities were addressed in this omnibus funding bill, including research funding. So as you can see on the slide, federal research agencies received notable increases. I'll just touch on a few that are, particularly important to UCSD. So for the NIH got its 8th consecutive annual increase. So it's increased by at least $2 billion over each year for the last 8 years. In addition to that, this year, ARPA-H, which is the new agency based on DARPA's high-risk, high-reward model, with a goal of fostering, faster development of treatments and cures and improving health. That agency received $1.5 billion to get started. The Biden administration recently appointed a director for this agency, so we are expecting to see details about funding opportunities to emerge soon. And so you'll, I'm sure, be hearing more about that in the coming months, both from VC Peek-Asa and probably from the federal relations team as well. Let's see, NSF also received an 11.7% increase, which we expect will help implement priorities like the new NSF Technology, Innovation, and Partnership Directorate, and also initiatives that were authorized in the CHIPS and Science bill that passed this summer. There are also big increases for NEH, DOE Office of Science, DARPA, NOAA, and many other research accounts. So just wanted to mention that this historic funding is really the culmination of advocacy efforts across the national research community. Last year, as Capitol Hill kind of slowly reopened, UC San Diego had faculty as well as leadership, including VC Peek-Asa and Chancellor Khosla, meet with congressional leaders, sometimes virtually, sometimes in person, about the importance of this funding to our research, education, and healthcare missions. So thank you to everyone who's on, watching this presentation today, who participated in those efforts. And I'm also here to say this year is going to be even more difficult, kind of given the narrow majorities in both houses of Congress and the partisan rancor that we're already seeing. So we'll be redoubling our efforts, to ensure that these kinds of research increases continue to happen. We can't do this work alone, so we're always encouraging the UCSD community to help us promote UC San Diego's mission at the federal level. So please reach out to our federal relations team if you're interested in being an advocate on research or other issues central to UC San Diego's mission. We can also be helpful if you need assistance in any other way with the federal government. And I'll put my email in the chat so that you can contact me if any of this appeals to you. And with that, I'll turn it back to Senior AVC Continetti.
Thank you, Executive Director Alpert and Vice Chancellor of Research Peek-Asa for that good news about the research portfolio and opportunities. Now we've come to the Q&A portion of our program, and I invite our panelists to turn on their cameras. I'm also welcoming Executive Director of Student Health and Wellbeing, Dr. Susan Fila, to the panel. As a reminder to our audience, please submit any questions you may have using the Q&A window. So for the first question, I have a question for Vice Chancellor Peek-Asa. Will the new California Climate Initiative letter of intent due date impact the rest of the timeline for that program?
The good answer is no. They extended just a couple days, but still plan to do the screening of the letter of intent on the same deadline, then the reviews, with the intent of funding these late summer. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually have a follow-up question for you as well. And that is, does the matching requirement for the California Climate Initiative have to be new funds?
Yes, that's a good question. And the answer is no. The goal of the matching funding is twofold. One, to assure the legislature that we're leveraging these funds. And the second is to really try to capitalize on work that is ongoing and is ready for a quick turnaround in showing measurable impact on climate priorities of California. So the match can be existing funds. The only restriction is that it can't be state funds. So you can use existing federal grants and contracts, as well as other sources of funding.
Okay, thank you. Now I have a question for Dean Antony. Where can I access a copy of the final UC UAW contracts?
Thanks for the question. So the final version of those contracts is still being finalized by the university system, OP. And as soon as we've got that, we'll be sure to post those in the FAQ that I alluded to earlier.
Okay, thank you. But I have another question for you, Dean Antony, and that is the following. Is there approved updated language that we can include in our offer letters to admitted graduate students that reflects the new contracts? And if so, where can I access this information?
Thanks, Bob. So every year, my team actually publishes revised template language to cover a lot of the scenarios for offer letters. They are working as we speak on revised template language. As soon as that language is posted, we'll send out a campus-wide announcement. We hope to do that very soon. But I might say, Bob, that, has always been true. We should carefully outline in any offer letter at least what the offer looks like for the first year, with a general description of what the following years would look like. There should be some kind of caveat, as always, about the overall campus commitment and the 5-year commitment for PhD, 3-year for MFA. We'll soon know what the exact funding amounts are as related to these CBAs. And so it would behoove us in these letters, and you'll see this in our template language, to make reference to these CBAs or collective bargaining agreements in the letters. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you. And now I have a question for EVC Simmons. What are the campus plans for faculty growth in order to meet the instructional needs of our growing student population?
Thanks very much, Bob. Yes, that is incredibly important, and that's something that the university has been working on for longer than I've been here. I think over the last 10 years, we've added or committed to add, it's something like 350 or 400 slots all in, because there have been 3 separate rounds of faculty growth plans. The current cycle we're in is adding 100 new FTE, 100 new lines. We've had the Chancellor's Joint FTE hiring program, which is over and above that, which currently we're adding 40 new FTE, and the one before that I think added about 30. And then we have 4 different cohorts of advancing faculty diversity and or NIH FIRST grants that are adding altogether, let me get this, about 60 more faculty. So, and those are still ongoing. So on the one hand, we have been adding and accelerating the rate at which we are adding more faculty, because as the questioner points out, we need to. And then at the same time, as AVC Rollins pointed out in his remarks, we are very deliberately slowing the rate at which we are growing the student population, because we need to catch up. We grew awfully fast, and we need to catch up the infrastructure and the faculty to give the students a good experience. So we are doing exactly that.
Thank you, EVC Simmons. The next question is for AVC Rollins, and it goes, if we aren't increasing the number of incoming undergraduates next fall, but my department still hopes to grow, how can we make that happen?
Great question. Thanks, Bob. A general thing we'll tell you, first of all, is we're thrilled when we locate the departments around this campus who want to grow, because we know that's not true for all of you. And there are limitations to what we can do. We're going to always be trying to do a combination of reactive and proactive enrollment planning with our applicant pool, because we do have to respond to what's truly there. If you're a department on campus who really wants to grow and the number of applicants requesting your majors is declining, there's not going to be necessarily a lot we can do on that front. But on the other hand, there are departments that are growing, and that really fuels our rocket, so to speak, to make this kind of thing possible. That said, and again, recognizing that some of these departments are very glad to be going down in applications, just know that we're trying very much to balance out what we can control with the acknowledgement that we can't completely predict the behavior of 17-year-olds, as you'll often hear me say. But that's why these conversations are so critical, and it's also so critical that even departments that don't feel the need to have a meeting with us respond to that survey we've got out right now, so we at least understand where you think things are on this front, and we'll know who we need to follow up with accordingly.
Thank you, AVC Rollins. The next question is back to you, EVC Simmons, and that is, what is the plan and timeline for the addition of much needed student housing on campus?
Yes, great question. And we are doing a lot in that area. So over the next about 3 years, we are adding just over 5,700 new beds on campus. So first in fall 23, we are adding the Theater District Living and Learning Neighborhood with 2,000 new beds. That's down kind of near the La Jolla Playhouse. And all the parking that used to be there and more are going underground. So we'll have a lot more parking there as well. Next up is the Pepper Canyon West housing for transfer students and upper division students, all apartment style living. That's right next to the brand new trolley stop near the Design and Innovation Building and the new Epstein Family Amphitheater. So 1,300 beds opening in fall 24. And then after that should be the Ridgewalk North Living and Learning Complex with about 2,400 new beds. That's, let's see, it's on the slope where Marshall Lowers is, those very small old low-rise housing for about 250 people. That's just to the west of Geisel Library. So that's going to be a brand new home for all of Marshall College, which will be absolutely fantastic. And that'll open in fall 25. So those are the 3 projects that we are already working on. And then beyond that, we're thinking about on the far side of the trolley tracks, east side of the trolley tracks, eventually redeveloping that old part of what used to be where Sixth College was, Pepper Canyon East, and that could give rise to about at least 3,000 additional beds. This is really important. We know students want to have the option to live on. It's really good for student success, and we are building as fast as we can.
A lot going on. Thank you for that update. The next question is for Chief Human Resources Officer Winbush and Dr. Schooley. What are the current masking policies for both campus and health sciences employees? That's the first part. And the second part, is there an anticipated end date to the daily symptom check requirement? So I'll turn it over to you two.
Let me turn the symptom checker over to Terry first, and then we'll get to the other issue.
Sure. So the symptom screener will remain. At this point, we expect it to remain until the end of next year. Yes, 2024, because the Cal OSHA updates that came out said that we are responsible to check the symptoms of our employees through 2024 unless they do an earlier revision. So we will keep you posted if they do an earlier revision, but as it stands right now, the end date is set to expire is December 2024. Over to you, Jeff.
As to masking, we obviously are encouraging people to continue to wear a mask when disease activity is high, whether it be COVID or flu, particularly in indoor settings where many people are around. Masking mandates are primarily now restricted to health settings, and that includes the student health service per state recommendations, regulations, and we try to maintain consistency with what UCSD Health is doing in that regard. I think it's important to understand that everyone will have a different threshold for masking. Some people are at greater risk for disease if they get infected, and they may have a lower threshold for wearing a mask, and no one should be shamed for wearing a mask. Others may feel more comfortable not wearing a mask in a given setting, and again, that's their choice, but people have to also think about others in closed settings. So we're in a more individualized decision-making state right now. And one of the reasons we give these updates about disease activity and try to keep that information current on the RTL website is to help you take into account local disease activity and making your own decisions.
Thank you. And Dr. Schooley, I'd like to follow up on that. I was surprised to hear the other day that Yosemite National Park was reinstating a mask requirement in indoor spaces. And the question that comes from our audience is, are there specific indicators that would trigger a return of the masking requirement for classroom settings?
One of the issues that we've struggled with all along is trying to stay away from individual triggers. The two problems with triggers are that they don't take into account trajectory, and they also don't take into account how multifaceted a decision is. We have tried to look at the holistic context in which the disease is affecting us, and that includes the rate of rise of cases, the severity of the cases we're seeing, whether this is a new variant that, for example, isn't as responsive to vaccination, what the hospitalization rates are, and other factors that help us make a more informed decision. Trigger-based decisions, like if we get to student positivity rates of 14.3%, do two things. They, one, make it less possible to make those nuanced recommendations to the campus. And secondly, we found in the early days of the trigger-based recommendations that people would set triggers and then see where things were going and then not make a decision until things had already gone over the trigger because they didn't want to make a decision proactively, which made it harder to get back to where you needed to be. So we think that triggers can be counterproductive if you set them in ways that have people saying, we're not there yet, we're not there yet, we're not there, we're not doing anything, we'll get there yet. Oh, now we're there, it's too late. So we watch these things. We meet every week, and we have ad hoc calls as necessary on the COVID status team, led by ABC Sutherland and BCSA Sutherland. I'm sorry. And as the data emerge, we take them into account and make recommendations to the cabinet and others about this. But right now, we don't think the triggers are there to recommend mandatory masks in all classroom settings.
Thank you, Dr. Schooley. So I'm afraid that is all the time we have for live questions today, and I want to thank everybody for your questions. Please, as we discussed earlier, continue to reference the Return to Learn website and future campus notices for important updates on the pandemic and other issues. I really like to thank the presenters and guests today for sharing their time and information with us. And thank you, the faculty and researchers of UC San Diego, for attending today and working together as a community during these times. We had more than 250 attendees today, and I think we all agree that these town halls have become an important part of how we stay informed and united as a community. The next town hall for staff will be on January the 31st, and you can visit the Human Resources Staff Town Hall page to register as shown in the chat and noted on the screen right now. So thank you again for joining us today. Take care, stay safe, and thank you for your contributions to our university, UC San Diego. Bye-bye.